Hi everyone, it's me, Sierra, the pool toy. I'm in everybody's favorite fishing world right now because I've been doing a lot of fishing. And by spending so much time fishing, I've had some time to quietly reflect on things, and I've kind of learned some stuff about fishing that really we can apply to other aspects of our life. So today I want to talk to you about 5 things that I've learned while fishing that I think can really help you too. And I hope you stick around for number 5. One of the first things I learned about fishing around here is that it takes a lot of patience. There's the fishing, where you're just waiting for the fish to bite. And there's also things like traveling between the islands. If you just have a surfboard or a canoe, it's going to take you a long time to get between the islands. So that's a nice little exercise in patience. And same for if you're starting to grind for that rune steel rod. You're going to need a lot of patience to get that. And that's kind of how it is with life too. You got to be patient. You can't be rushing into everything. You can't rush your way into a relationship. Because if you really aren't trying to get to know the person first, how do you even know it's going to work out? What about developing another skill? If you try to rush your way through that, you might be practicing things that are way beyond your abilities because you weren't patient and try to stick with anything that was, part of the fundamentals. Same things about just being patient with people. If you work a job and you're very impatient with the customers, that's not going to last very long. If you're just a very impatient person in general, that makes it harder for you to, meet people, learn about them, make friends. So patience is one of these things that, we can work on and just try to be more tolerant with certain things. I'm not saying to be tolerant with everything. I mean, we can all have our red lines, but all in all, it would really benefit us if we just tried being a little more patient. The second thing when it comes to fishing is that luck and chance do play a part in what you get. However, it's also your skills and abilities that determine whether or not you make the most of it. You might be catching blues, you might be catching greens, but sometimes a red will show up, and then you better be on the ball so that you can actually catch it. And sometimes they just throw a gray at you and you pick up a broken umbrella. But it kind of works that way with life. Sometimes life throws some garbage at you. But a lot of other times, there's a perfectly good opportunity that shows up. Maybe a chance meeting with a person occurs. Maybe a job opportunity shows up. And do you have the skills to make the most of that opportunity? Do you know how to talk to people? Do you have riz? Can you flirt? Or can you talk to them in a way where, they want to get to know you? Or for the job opportunity, do you have the skill set available, or can you quickly learn it so that you can actually succeed at this new job? And it's unfortunate that it's, a lot of it can feel like it's up to chance. But the good news is that when an opportunity does show up, it really is ultimately up to you about whether or not you catch it or not. Ooh, rainbow fish. The third thing that I learned when it came to fishing is that if you want to make the most of your time, if you want to reach your goals faster, you want to grind for that speedboat or those top tier rods, one of the fastest ways to do that is by upgrading your gear. You could technically get yourself a rune steel rod after only using the beginning rod that you get at the start of your journey. It's just a stick with a string on it. But upgrading your rod along the way allows you to gain points faster. It lets you catch the larger fish. It makes it easier to catch the higher rarity fish, so you end up losing less fish. If you're catching a red or a rainbow and you're using the stick, that's going to be a lot harder. And life is kind of like that too. You need to upgrade yourself along the way. Just because something worked at the beginning doesn't mean it's going to keep working forever. And you might have to change up the way that you do things in order for that to work. You might pick up a word or two here or there watching anime about, if you're trying to learn Japanese. But really, the best tool set that you'll probably get learning Japanese is if you enroll in some type of a class. If you immerse yourself in the language. These are other things that people can do to learn a new language. If you have a job and you want to develop in your career some more and, rise through the ranks, you don't get to just do it by doing the same thing that you do every day. You have to develop your skill set. And, once you get better at things, then you can start rising higher. And so it's important for us to remember that, growth is important. You might get further along if you start bashing your head up against the wall. But, we don't have all the time in the world. We like to live that way, but we really don't. And so it's important that we're, using the time that we have wisely. So if you do have a goal, something that you're working toward and something that you want, it really does pay off to sort of invest in the things that'll help get you there. The fourth thing on our list is that, when you get a fish on the line, and if you're just pulling constantly, that line is going to break, and you're going to lose your fish. And the way that you don't have that happen is that you don't pull on the line constantly. You want to let things ease off a little bit. Things cool down, you can pull back a little bit, and that's fine. But you don't want to just be really locked in on it. Because, that's how it is with life too. You apply for a job, and if you start giving phone calls every day to try to check in and see what that status is, you're probably not going to get that job. You thought you were just looking very eager and awesome, and that you really wanted to work there. But they probably didn't see it the same way to be getting a phone call from somebody constantly. Same thing with a heartbreak. Sometimes you're doing everything you can to try to hold on to this relationship, and, the relationship probably actually isn't even the best thing for you. And that maybe they need some work, maybe you need some work, and that just trying to hold on to this relationship and just really clench it, it doesn't help you. And it doesn't save the relationship. So there's all kinds of things that you can do, but you just need to go with the flow a little better. You get pulled out in a riptide. Well, you don't fight just straight against the riptide, you go another way. You let it pull you out a little ways, and then you go sideways to the riptide, and that's how you get to safety again. You don't want to be fighting with everything. There's all kinds of opportunities that show up, and if you really try really hard, sometimes it still doesn't work out. And then when you just keep trying to force it after that, that just really hurts you more than anything. So you gotta know when to ease up. You gotta know when to look for an alternate path. It's not all just holding on for dear life. There's another way out there, and sometimes it might not be clear where that way is at the moment. But give it a little time. Take a step back. And just wait for the next one. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about today is that there's always going to be another fish. Sure, you can get the top level fishing rods, you can get a speedboat, you can 100% the fish index, you can even finish the seasonal event that they have going on. But every time you cast your line into the water, there's going to be another fish. And the way that you can keep things interesting is by inviting others along the way, whether it's joining a public instance and spending time with new people, getting to know them while you're fishing, or inviting friends to come hang out with you and fish together and just have some great conversations. I think that's one of the appeals of so many of these fishing worlds in VR is that it's an activity that you can do, but it's a fantastic activity for you to be able to just hang out and talk to. And that's kind of how it is with life also. You can go at life alone. You can do everything you can to, win at life, whether it's the job that you want or, trying to find a good relationship. But, it would really help us all if we, reached out more to others, spending time with friends, getting out of our comfort zone a little bit just so that we can be around others. And I think that would be so cool. When was the last time that you got a chance to spend time with friends? Might not be the friends that you're online with all the time, but maybe you can make some new friends in your area. It won't be easy. It never is, especially outside of VR. But life is just such a neat journey as you interact with others and learn from them. They learn from you. There's a lot that the world has to offer, just like this fishing world. But to be honest, if there aren't any other people around, it's just not the same. And so I hope that you're able to get out there and meet some people and have a great time. I promise you, it really is extremely rewarding. Well, I hope fishing has taught you something today, and I know it's definitely taught me quite a bit. And so I hope that you are able to take some of this advice or learn something from all of this and have a great one.